Good evening to everyone and welcome to the Portraits in Refuge Artist Talk reception. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm the curator of the show, Karen Smigliani. I am also a founding member of Unbound Visual Arts. Thank you to all of the artists who submitted art to the show. The call went out early at the beginning of the shelter-in-place mandate, when so much was unknown about this pandemic. Your work collectively captured an array of thoughts and feelings that many of us were experiencing or perpetuating. I truly appreciate your sharing your words and your images with our arts community. Additional thanks to our artist speakers for joining us tonight. We're fortunate to have you here with us to learn more about you and about your work. I'll run through how we'll proceed with the program in a few minutes, but first, our executive director, John Quattrale, will say a few words.
Thank you, Karen. I just want to introduce one volunteer that's here tonight, Julia Marcantonio. She worked on this exhibit, and she's actually working on this, managing the slideshow and help us tonight. This is actually her last day of volunteering, but she's going to be her and 3 other volunteers worked on an exhibit of their artwork, which we're going to launch very soon. And we have a couple of other exhibits online, virtual galleries as well. And if you go to Unbound Visual Arts website, you can find them. We're going to start another virtual exhibit because we're not going to be doing physical exhibits for a while. I do want to make note, there's a couple of UVA Board of Directors members on the call tonight, Susan Loomis and Brenda Gale McSweeney. And I think I'm going to turn it back to Karen now, who will introduce the artists.
Okay, great. I'm going to run through how we'll proceed with the program, just to refresh your memory about what was on my email. We'll go alphabetically by artist speaker's first name. We're trying to limit the amount of time you speak to 5 minutes. When I call your name, you'll be unmuted, and if you'd like to share a little bit about yourself, please do that. And then we'll go on to show your artwork. You can say first slide, please. And your image will appear on our screens. And when you're ready to move on to the next slide, just say next slide, please. If you happen to run over a few minutes, like a minute or so, I'll gently interrupt you and just kind of nudge you to move on so we could get to all of our artist speakers. And then we will hold a question and answer session after all of the artists have spoken. But our visitors can go to the bottom of your screen in the Zoom screen and click on the chat and enter a question for the artist there at any time. But be sure to enter the artist name as well, who you're asking the question of. But also during our question and answer session, you may raise your hand and we can unmute you and can ask a question. And there's also an icon, a hand icon down under participant, if you would rather do that, put a graphic up on your video. So I think that's it. And we can get started then with our first artist speaker, Anita Helen Cohen. We have to unmute you, I think. Let's unmute.
I just did it.
Okay, perfect.
Okay?
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Terrific. I'm Anita Cohen, and I am part of UVA, proudly part of UVA. I grew up, so there's a little bit about me, for those of you who might be interested. I grew up in New York City, and I probably started drawing and painting when I was about 6 or 7. I just loved it and drove my parents crazy because that's all I really wanted to do. Anyway, I used to visit all the art supply stores that I could possibly get to or drag my parents to and ask a million questions and try to learn as much as I could about painting. And through the years, I have really developed a love for watercolor painting. And for the first maybe 20 years of my work, I painted on regular paper, watercolor paper, which is very absorbent, textured, and for those of you who know, you know that very well. But for those of you who don't, perhaps that might be news. In any event, I have been watercolor painting for about 30 years. I have always painted something from nature. I think that I'm not sure if my childhood in the Bronx deprived me of nature or I just became in love. I just loved nature, and it's sort of trite sounding, but you know, anyone who takes a walk with me will know that I drive them crazy because I look at every leaf and every color and every wrinkle and every texture and form, and that's just the way I kind of am. And so all of my work is based on nature. My original and beginning work on paper was more floral, and I used to do a lot of up close, almost botanical, but not quite, much more painterly paintings of flowers and garden leaves and such. But recently, I'd say in the last 10 years, I have evolved to doing, or just wanted to try, painting on something called UPO. And that is a plastic surface where no paint is absorbed. Very different from paper, where paint is very much absorbed. And so the paintings you're going to see, and all the paintings that I have done, not only in for portraits and Refuge, but all my other work is on UPO. And when you think of water on plastic, I think that what might come to mind for those of you who have not tried it or don't know about it is it's very, well, the paint will just sit there in a puddle because it's not absorbed. So depending upon how much water you use and so forth, you can play around on the UPO, mixing colors and such, and sort of chasing and taming, trying to chase and tame the paint to what you want it to look like. But I will tell you that the fun part of me with UPO is that you can't really predict what you're going to get. And what happens is there's a conversation between you and the painting because it speaks to you as it dries and it tells you what it is. And you can change it very easily, but you can also utilize it and use it in part of the conversation. So the paintings that I've done for Sheltering in Place, as I call my series, or for the Portraits in Refuge paintings that you can see, which is, we'll call this slide number 1, is a combination of calm in chaos. And this is the nature of what I painted, and this is the title of this particular triptych. Because I winter on Sanibel. I was on Sanibel Island in Florida the whole time the pandemic really hit. I could not travel back to Boston very safely until July. So my husband and I were there for quite a long time. And I did a lot of paintings of water and rocks because it seems to me that Sheltering in Place, Portraits in Refuge, Calm and Chaos all speak to the same kind of feeling, which is part of me was very calm because I felt very safe in a very small place near water. except that there was always this undercurrent of tension because of the disease and what was going to happen next and so forth. Our lives were so, and are still so chaotic. So this painting, this triptych, is called Calm and Chaos. I've done a couple of them. There's only one represented here that has this water surrounding and comforting rocks, if you will. But you can see from the texture that it's sort of chaotic. So that's kind of what I wanted to portray and how I felt actually. And in my next painting, slide 2. Okay, this was the first one I did. Actually, the Calm and Chaos was not quite the first one. This is the first one and I call this Sheltering in Place. Same kind of feeling. You can see the texture that UPO creates in color when I mix the color right on the paper, well, on the plastic, if I should really be actually accurate. And the rocks are protected by the water and vice versa. You can sort of see it both ways. And the last one is another version of the Calm and Chaos, where rocks and water meet. And there's tremendous movement in the water, but not so much in the rocks, although there is some movement in this one, in the rocks even more than in the last one. So I just wanted to share these with you. I think that's the last one, is that correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. Yes.
So just to summarize, I used UPO in all of these. I felt very calm in a certain funny way, being near the water, but I also felt very much that life was chaotic, and I tried to represent that in my work.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you, Karen.
And our next artist is Bob Greene.
Thanks, Karen. And so really glad to be here. I'm a consultant and coach. I work at Lesley University. Recently joined the UVA Council of Advisors. And just want to thank Karen and John and everyone else who's involved with putting this together. So one aspect of my art, I'm a more or less self-taught photographer, digital artist. And one aspect of my art is that I enjoy seeing commonplace objects and seeing them sometimes in a new light. And COVID-19 has led me to see everything in a new light. And I really wasn't sure what I wanted to submit for this show. And as I was going through a great many of my images, I was surprised by how they were saying different things to me now than they may have said when I first made them, in some cases a few years ago. So that's what I had decided to move forward with. So I have 4 images here, so we can just start with this one. So this is at the outside of the Hirshon Gallery in Washington, DC. And when I made this image, I just loved how the chairs and tables were stacked up and stacked together. And I really thought that, I was hoping that whoever did it was doing it with a sense of humor and almost kind of creating a kind of a sculpture of sorts. And now, as I look at it now, what it says to me is waiting. And just waiting for when we can put these chairs and tables back out in the patio and enjoy an afternoon of art and have a cup of coffee and just relax and not worry about it. So what was initially for me kind of a, and it still is, of course, more of a humorous, almost a humorous image, has taken on a little bit different light. Okay, so we can switch to the next one. this is one where it'd be nice if we could get up close to it, but this will certainly more than adequate. While I was roaming in the Maine coast, I became enamored with this huge boulder. And I just became fascinated by it and just how complex it was, and almost kind of like an Ansel Adams landscape in this one boulder. So I made this very tightly cropped image as a way to emphasize texture, tone, and detail, and kind of Ansel Adamsy, if you will allow that. And when I looked at it again and thought of this show, it was the aspect of being so tightly cropped that struck me. That, you know, certainly I feel like my life right now is kind of tightly cropped, and that there's narrow borders, much more narrow than they were in the good old days of, you know, January or February of this year. And how right now being in such tight borders, so being so tightly cropped right now, is forcing, I think, many of us to attend to our personal landscapes in a way that we may or may not want to do, or may or may not have experience doing. Okay, we can move on. Yeah, so this was an image I made a few years ago in a grand old Chinese home, which is now a museum in a famous water village and kind of tourist attraction in about 90 minutes outside of Shanghai. And for me, this image has always had a very meditative quality to it. And it still does. And yet, as I look at it now, with the progress of the pandemic in mind, you know, sometimes I wonder, are we, you know, in the inside looking out or the outside looking in? And one of characteristic of some of these old homes and it was having areas even within the home that were exposed to the elements. So are we inside or are we outside at this moment? You know, are we done with the first wave of the pandemic? Are we having a second one? Or are we almost through it because we're going to get a vaccine and herd immunization at some point soon? And also for me, this image also brings up about maintaining calm and maintaining presence even during the storm of COVID-19. Okay, so we can move to the last image. So this is a totally opportunistic, accidental self-portrait. And you know, I'd ask you to guess how it was made, but it is a reflection looking at a large stainless steel soup pot. And, you know, so I've always thought of it just as kind of a fun knockoff kind of image, which I've never shown before. And then when I looked at it and had this show in mind, first of all, it's the only self-portrait, so it's my portrait in Refuge. But the jarring and distorted and almost abstract nature of the image kind of reflects exactly how I feel a lot of days as we move through the pandemic. And so in some sense, this is, at least on some days, a pretty accurate self-portrait of me in Refuge. So that's it. So thanks. And again, I really appreciate being part of the show.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much. Linda, we'll unmute you. Someone Someone has to unmute Linda. Mike.
Okay, I think I'm in, right? You can hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Can we put I only have one slide, so you might as well put it on so I can use it as a reference. I started pouring paint back in about 1979 when I was living in Ipswich, and I went to the beach, and I had changed studios. Every time I change a studio, my artwork has to evolve into the kind of space and the environment and the atmosphere. And it's always sort of traumatic because I have no idea what's going to come out. And I can't go on with what I was doing before. I had taken my large 6 feet by 7 feet paintings in beautiful little small, I don't know, large format slides to New York. And somebody said, oh, they're too pretty. They remind me of Indian painting. And I thought, I love Indian painting. But I realized that they weren't what people were looking for. So I said, I have to reinvent myself. And I was going through a transition from a divorce. So it was a total emotional washout. So I go to the beach on Cranes Beach, which is one of those lovely places that you can walk for miles. And I was watching the water come in and flow and move across the sand and whatever. So the first thing I did is I said, why not take some sand? And so I took some sand and I took one of my old canvases. My new studio had no wall space. It had 10 windows. So I had to learn how to work on the floor. So the combination of the ocean suggesting tides and movement and sort of like a choreograph, and the materials of the sand. So I took the sand and I mixed it and I threw it with some acrylic combination and a special kind of extender that was good for house paints. And I threw it over this old canvas that I had done that I thought I liked back then, but not anymore. And it added a whole kind of explosive dynamism. And I said, oh, this is good. And then it went from doing that to covering old things into learning how to use aniline dyes and mixing the dye and watching everything move on the canvas, which is on the floor. I used squeegees, no brushes. I used colors that were completely nature oriented. There were all kinds of ones you could get at Johnson's for furniture and other things. And so you could dissolve the dyes. And then I started adding sand to the paints and building up these layers with a combination of the whole painting being a choreograph of nature, you know, a small little view rather than, you know, a composition made out of lots of different parts. I wanted people to see that whole projection at once. So that worked out for a number of years. And then I did archaeology, and I was working on a ceremonial mound in Salisbury, Mass, up north from Ipswich, where Cranes Beach was and where my studio was. And I was digging down in sand down to a glacial level right near the Merrimack River. And I thought I just reversed my process. I built all these things up, and now I'm going through all this sand. You have to sift everything you dig up. You have to sift and analyze what's there, and then you keep going. And it used to be about a meter square every weekend that you would dig and sift and whatever sort. And then you had to backfill the same thing all over again. So I did a reverse. And then I moved shortly after that away from Ipswich back to Boston, and my painting changed again. And just recently, I was working at an art exhibit, you know, an art demonstration with UPO and Jacquard inks at Blick Art Supply, and I had a chance to pour these dyes, which is different. I appreciate what Anita's doing with the watercolor. These stay on the surface too, and you can mix them and add a thinner, which is basically alcohol. And they did fusion, and they did things that I was looking for when I was pouring paints. And so now I'm pouring paints in my limited environment, which is shelter in place. I no longer have a big studio with I have a big window in the back, and the light comes through the window, and it just illuminates all these little jars that look like magic formulas inside, because the colors of the inks are so pure. And I just love the intensity of them. This one was done last summer. The one I submitted, hopefully, which Karen didn't choose, was one that I did for the exhibit, with one day when those colors were just calling me, and it was mostly blues and fuchsias and other colors. And this one was done last summer, and I kept wanting more yellow, so I kept adding more thinner and more yellow and more thinner and more yellow. And I realized it was done about this time of year, really, exactly. And so I think I titled it, yes, I did, Sunny. And my process is still working on the way things move in sort of a choreographed way. Movement is very important to me, and the interaction and fusion and the accidental kind of colors that come out of the fusion. Watercolor does a similar thing, and I can appreciate especially all that water, because I just love water. And having lived near a beach, that was terrific. So I think I've covered my artwork, so thank you.
Beautiful. Very nice, Linda. Thank you very much. So next is Madeline Lee on with us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Madeline. Thank you for joining.
Okay, you can hear.
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks. I'm happy to be here today. A little bit about myself. I have been a member at Unbound Visual Arts for about a year, and a lot of my work focuses on place and is very place specific, and I really enjoy observation of our environments and surroundings. I take a lot of interest in urbanism, and also work in community development and affordable housing, and it certainly informs the themes that I think through as an artist, and the ways I consider identity and place-based identities in our human existence in all of these different spaces that we occupy as artists and in our different daily roles, and felt a lot of connection to the theme of this show in certain ways. And also I think as I reflect more on my work, have been thinking about the meaning of refuge during this time, and how to deconstruct that, as it's probably been a time of reflection and kind of reckoning for many of us also. So yeah, I can, if you want to share slides. I actually was painting several pieces immediately leading up to and during the pandemic before this call came out, based on my immediate surroundings near where I live, or I was just setting up an easel outdoors and starting to observe more closely these spaces around me. And I think there were starting to be stirrings of something's going on, to then going through lockdown and really meditating on what are these spaces that we occupy. And I think that a lot of these paintings were coming from a space of trying to deconstruct and recognize a really deep need for home and homemaking and places that are based in care and attention, and really trying to carefully consider, you know, what are these little spaces around me or expansive spaces around me that for so long we just kind of pass through or don't take too much time to pause and really think on their meanings and how they came to be and their histories. So this is a park that I live near, and there's some beautiful trees, and I was fascinated by the light and the shadows. And so I think that is part of my choice in painting it, but also part of me just unpacking existence in this space and environment, and really thinking more so in the next painting too, if you want to switch over, with some of the housing that surrounds where I live in Cambridge, feeling a bit on an edge zone of, you know, different demographics, and you can just tell by like the architecture of the buildings that certain apartment style living or multifamily housing is by design, you know, creating spaces for different types of people at different points in history. And I think more and more as collectively we're thinking about what kinds of privileges it takes to shelter in place, and, you know, what is the meaning of taking refuge during this time. I think lately and through these paintings, I was also doing a lot of questioning our senses of safety. You know, if we are able to create art during this time, what is the refuge, or is it about what are we taking shelter from? Is it just this pandemic, or is now also really a time for reckoning with certain kinds of sheltering we've done for many years? And I definitely am thinking about race in the context of the United States in this time also, and the weave of different housing and urban structures that have, you know, created so many issues that have exacerbated the pandemic at the same time. So part of my work has been wrapped up in finding the care and appreciation for the spaces that I inhabit during this time, while also thinking about like who is entitled to a sense of safety during this time. And it's a bit overwhelming, but also I find really important.
Thank you so much, Madeline. Very nice, very thought-provoking. Thank you. Up next, Nancer Ballard.
I can unmute myself here. So thank you all. Thank you all for zooming in. I'm a writer and a book artist, photographer, and a lawyer. So a lot of my work is conceptual and also tends to combine text and visual elements. And I hadn't really realized it, but that's true in all the pieces that are here today. I have an MFA from Bennington College Writing Seminars, and I studied book arts at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts. And I was a photojournalist in New York and Boston. Right now, I'm a resident scholar at Brandeis University's Women's Studies Research Center. So during the pandemic, like many others, I sought inspiration and solace from whatever I could repurpose and from what I saw or found in nature. And so that's reflected in the three pieces in this show, which also represent what I call the early, middle, and late periods of my COVID-19 experience so far. So the first piece that I'll have you put up is called Love in the Time of COVID-19. And it's a tribute to first responders and a marker of the early days when nursing homes were the epicenter of the crisis. And when I first heard about a mask shortage, I was incredulous that with so many medical centers, Massachusetts could possibly face a shortage, until a neighbor of mine started making masks for Newton Wellesley Hospital. And I'm a terrible sewer. Most of what I know about sewing, I've learned from making book arts projects. And my sewing machine actually comes from a swap area in our local transfer station. But the day before Governor Baker shut everything down, I bought some fabric and what later turned out to be more important, elastic. And a few days later, I called up the executive director of an assisted living facility where my mother had lived out her last years and asked if he needed some homemade masks. And he started crying on the phone with gratitude. So I made 30 or 40 masks for his employees and residents. And as I was working on them, I imagined how frightening it would be for people, particularly with cognitive impairments, to suddenly wake up and have everyone around them masked. So I began to add tags to try and make them a little more personal. So each one has a personal tag on it, and some of them have little stars and things. And before sending them off to their new lives, I lined them up in rows like fresh produce, which was another essential thing that was then in short supply, and took a few photographs. And then later, when I began working with the images in Photoshop, I wanted to emphasize both the similarity of the forms of the masks and also the individual differences in the fabric and how they sit. Because I felt like commonality and difference was a major theme for me during the pandemic. And the messages on the masks are both personal, you know, talking about love, and also completely anonymous because I don't know any of the people that they went to. And I think that that's another theme of the pandemic for me. So my second piece, perfect. My second piece was made later after wearing masks had become politicized and the president was trying to punish blue states by making them bid against each other for equipment. And two quite close friends and several relatives of friends had then died of COVID. So some days nothing really seemed meaningful enough to get me through the whole day. But I read about someone who'd written a 3-line, quote, found poem from looking at some titles on her bookshelf. And this inspired me to pull all the books off my shelves, which was somewhat cathartic. And I started lining them up on the floor to see if I could create a poem or two that would lead me out of the dark times. And the only rule I had was that each title had to be a different line so that I could stack them up and that anyone could read the poem. So here's the one that's in the show. I'll read it. In this dark house, breath, eyes, memory. What really matters? Swimming in the volcano, the feeling of what happens, surviving survival, hope in the dark. So to photograph the poems, I stacked the books up so that the lines would more or less line up, as you can see, which ended up creating this sort of jagged Jenga-like form, which I like because it sort of emphasized how tenuously balanced things are, even in good times. And it was actually a fascinating kind of Ouija board-like experience that I would recommend because 8 poems later, this is only one, but I did 8 of them, I felt as if there was some unseen consciousness that had been influencing my book buying over the last 30 years. And that all I knew and felt and feared and hoped about the world was already sitting on my bookshelves waiting for me to discover it. Okay, on to the last one. So the last one is called Tutus on Tuesday. And it's a tribute to everyone who has let themselves entertain whimsical, creative ideas during the pandemic, and to all the parents who are homeschooling. So this was a little bit later in May and June, so the weather was nicer. And I knew that a lot of parents and young adults had started having dress up Fridays or fairy goddess Mondays. And so the title and the text was to this is, since no one was looking, they wore tutus on Tuesdays. And the inspiration for this came a few years ago when an artist named Catherine Evans had what I believe she called a thistle, T-H-I-S-T-L-E, installation on the grounds of the now closed Medfield State Psychiatric Hospital, which is the same hospital where Shutter Island was filmed, and it's in my town. I was captivated by Evans' so-called thistles hugging the trunks of the trees because they reminded me of ballet tutus. I took some photographs of them, and I had imagined creating a children's book about a little tree that wanted to dance rather than be rooted in one place. And I never got around to writing the book, and Evan's installation is long gone. But in the late spring of 2020, when I was wandering around the grounds of this hospital a lot, imagining parents and kids and young men and women indulging in secret fantasies during the pandemic inside their homes, where I imagine no one could see or judge them. And I thought, well, what if the trees had their own secret lives when no one was looking? Later, when I finished the piece, I discovered that Tutu Tuesday is actually a thing. Apparently, February 22nd, 2022 is officially Tutu Tuesday, a day on which regular people are all supposed to wear tutu skirts in public to celebrate diversity and creativity across the globe. So mark it on your calendar. And meanwhile, consider this. What if one of the things we gained from this pandemic was that we could all find a little more freedom in some corner of our psyches, in addition to all the warnings that are now part of our daily lives? That's it.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you, Nancy. Now we have Niki Li.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so my name is Niki. I came from China and I graduated from the museum school at Tufts University. I'm currently based in New York City and I do graphic design, animation, video editing here. So before I switched to fine arts, I majored in fashion design from undergrad and I worked in the fashion industry shortly. But later I felt like I couldn't fully fulfill myself in the industry. And I've always been very, very socially interested. So that sort of guided me to pursue a fine arts degree to sort of like explore the intersection between art and also sociology. Because contemporary art, it's all about getting socially engaged. And that's something I've always been very interested in. For my art projects, I mainly use graphic arts as my media to open up conversations about cross-cultural communication, cultural appropriation, and also the impact of globalization on people's ideologies and also consumerism. These are the topics that I've been exploring through my art. Yeah, thank you. So I have 3 paintings in this exhibition. I think they pretty much represented my thought process of how I found light and power within myself during quarantine. As everybody knows, in New York City, life had always been very active, very vibrant before the lockdown. So it's kind of like surreal for me to like just roam around the city seeing nobody's actually walking the street because everywhere's just so packed before. And I've been talking to my friends. Everyone's just basically feeling lonely and bored and isolated and socially deprived during this pandemic. For me, I feel the same way as well, but I think I've managed to embrace the solitude and take advantage of it to reconnect with myself and also to restart working on some of the long overdue projects that I didn't really have the time and peace of mind to really focus on before. I had a lot of like substantive conversations with myself just to listen to like what my heart says, ask myself questions like what is actually worth pursuing in life and what my calling is. And I think the process of having these conversations and making art is really important for my well-being, both mentally and emotionally. And I also realize it is only when you're free, when you're alone by yourself, can you be truly free. I've been reading this book written by this German philosopher, Schopenhauer, and there's a chapter basically talking about you cannot be truly free unless you're alone by yourself. And I think I can totally relate to that just based on my experiences throughout the quarantine. So can you go to the next slide? So for this series, I took a lot of photos in New York City. I took photos of the architectures in New York City, and I used Photoshop and other digital editing apps to sort of like blended the architectural elements with my own quarantine emotions and sentiments into the overall graphics of this series. As you can see here from the first one and this one, and can we go to the next one? Thank you. There's a lot of like fragmented geometrical shapes with psychedelic colors. I think they sort of symbolize the turbulences of this time, and also what I've gone through emotionally, spiritually. I think that by immersing myself in art making and contemplation, I managed to find a light and power within myself. And these paintings sort of illustrated my thought process and also my reflection on the ups and downs of my life trajectory and how I reconciled with my own struggles during this unprecedented time of history. As a person who came from China, given our complicated political climate right now, I think I sometimes feel really like vulnerable and very just overwhelmed. I think that making art has definitely helped me a lot. And I hope that's also the message that I'm able to convey to the audience, and I also hope that the audience can receive some sort of solace and peace of mind from my paintings. Yeah, and I want to thank John and Karen for putting together this amazing show, and I am happy to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niki. Thank you. Wonderful. Next is Robin Dawkins.
Hi, I'm Robin, and I also want to thank Karen and John for the opportunity to exhibit my work and participate in the conversation, to meet everybody. A little bit about myself. I got a BA from Mass College of Art and went to Lesley University. So in addition to being an artist, I'm also an outpatient therapist and art therapist. And art, plays a major part in my my own mental health and well-being as well. And over the years, I've started drawing and painting when I was a child. And over the years, I've focused mostly working with oils and focused a lot on nature and the urban environment, living in the city, abstracting what I had seen or what I'm seeing, mostly geometric in form, focusing on line and color and shapes. And more recently, I think I'm becoming more expressive in my work in terms of using more layers, so that not so flat or designed, but more layering the paint and working over shapes and seeing what happens. This seems to be like a surprise element that I really look forward to when I'm working in that fashion. I guess you can go to the first, yeah. So this is view from a window, and so during the earlier stages of the pandemic, of course, it was hard to go outside. There was the social isolation, and this is actually based on a view from my living room window. I have a building next door, and there's a courtyard. And being sort of mid-spring at that time, the greenery was starting to come alive. So I was just and you know, not being able to go outside and really explore and view nature and the urban landscape and what I've seen in person, really just kind of taking it from my living room. So this is really just a visual expression of that. And the layers, there is a psychological process to the layering. I really believe that in terms of, you know, what we've been through in this whole pandemic and the isolation, working through the other image I have also expresses that as well. This is working through layers. And in this one, I didn't use paint. I mean, I did use paint, but it was more of a collage experiment. I really had this urge to work with my hands rather than painting on canvas, and having some recycled cardboard pieces hanging around. I just felt this urge to start to cut the pieces up and play around with them, and creating this circular form. I really feel that it represents the earth in some way. The layers are representing the difficulties that we are going through right now, and the severing of those layers, putting them back together, and trying to find some repair. And you know, again, there is that psychological piece to my work, and the process of is also very therapeutic for myself as well. And I think that's all I can say, really.
That's perfect. Thank you, Robin. Very good. Love it. And Sara Gately, you're
All right, can everyone hear me?
yes.
Great.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for including me in this exhibition. I was really happy that there was a virtual exhibition that I could participate in. I got my BA at Hampshire College, where I studied comparative religion and visual art. I got my MED at Lesley University. I'm currently an elementary visual arts educator and have been for 10 years. I'm also an immune compromised individual, and I care for and live with my elderly mother with several underlying health conditions. So when we went into lockdown, I also personally went into some very severe lockdown. And just to backtrack a little bit, in the past 5 years, I've been doing these portraits of animals, which have had sort of a religious element to them, just to evoke compassion in the viewer. So a lot of my artwork sort of is a juxtaposition between the sacred and the profane, sort of street art meets sacred art. Even my process, I work on canvas, but I use oil-based paint markers, which is traditionally a street artist medium. And if we could look at the first slide. So this painting is a direct reaction to being in the grocery store right around the time of when all this happened, going in there and seeing people with their mouths just wide open with the emptiness that we were experiencing in the meat aisle and in the toilet paper aisle, and just people being unable to navigate what they were seeing, and even my own self being completely shocked. And because I was in such a personal lockdown and also a literal lockdown, I felt very chaotic. I felt as if everything was out of control, and I felt the need for protection for me and my family. And I've been making a series of these goddesses and gods as spiritual protectors for my family. I literally hang them up around our house to protect us from everything. So I'm really trying to take spirituality and weave it into reality. And if we could look at the next slide. So this is more of a direct reaction to how the pandemic has been handled by our so-called leaders. I think that a lot of the things that have happened could have been preventable. We are experiencing mass grief, and that is very hard to process. And I have a lot of anger about this issue, and I feel the need that there needs to be a power of retribution for our so-called leaders because of what we've experienced. And this goddess is representative of that retribution that I feel needs to occur in order for things to be equal or for justice to be served. And I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Fascinating, really good, interesting. Oh, okay. Do we have anybody with questions or comments for the artist? We can open up the Q&A. You can wave your hand or go under participants and wave your digital hand or hold your hand up, or we'll answer questions in the chat from the chat feature.
There's one
Yes.
comment.
Yeah.
Susan, do you want to speak up, or you want to, can I read your comment?
Sure.
Comment is amazing work, everyone, very inspiring.
I actually, I have a question for Niki about the medium of your work.
Yep.
Because it looks like, I mean, it has a very graphic design feel to it.
Yeah.
And I don't,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure if you guys can see the Brooklyn Bridge, like the fragmented Brooklyn Bridge from this picture, from this image.
Is it digital? Is the work digital?
Yeah, they're all digital. So I took photos of these architectures first, then I used Photoshop and other editing apps to sort of like manipulate the pictures and adjusted the colors to make them more vibrant and more psychedelic. Like I personally am very drawn to like vibrant colors, and because we're sharing screen, so the resolution is not high enough. If you like look into the pictures, you'll see like the architectural structural elements. Can we go to the next one? Thank you. Yeah, this one, and especially the third one. Yeah, this one. It's not very clear to see from here, but the original image, which is bigger, you can see the architectural elements. And that's how I blended the New York City architectures with my own emotions. And because I came from a design background, so it's pretty like organic and natural for me to make art in this way, I think. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
No, it did. Thank you very much.
No problem.
John has a question. Unmute, can we unmute? John, you may have to unmute yourself.
I thought everyone's presentations was really excellent, and I'm really glad that we're recording this, and we'll put it on our YouTube channel, and we can share it even more widely, because I think everyone was well prepared, and it's felt like we were really, you were giving lots of tips on pandemic, and I was taking notes.
It's fascinating to see how everyone experienced the beginning and the middle of the pandemic and how we reacted differently to protect ourselves and to get through it. it was very fascinating to see that emotional side. Thank you for sharing your words and your imagery. It's very powerful. Any other comments or questions from anyone? Let's see. Madeline Lee, to everyone. Sara, I appreciate how you clearly identified feelings of grief and anger in your work and experiencing this moment and channeling them through into protection and demands for accountability. Good point. Very, very powerful.
Karen?
Yes.
Hi, it's Anita.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you and John and all of the artists. I was just fascinated and very interested and moved by everybody's personal experience of having to shelter in place, express this through art and or words or both. And I just wanted to thank everybody for being part of this reception, or whatever we're going to call this.
Thank you, Anita. Yeah. Very good. Linda, to everyone, thanks for a view into the artist's art and life, is her comment. Very good, yes. And then Nancer says, yes, thank you, Anita. She feels the same similarly. And Sara Gately says, thank you to Madeline. Your work is amazing and vibrant. Mm-hmm. Yes, every piece is very powerful, I found. I was very pleased with all of the submissions. Anybody else? Any additional comments, questions? Okay, well, I would just like to remind people that you can view all of the pieces on in the virtual exhibits. We have 3 virtual exhibits on our website at unboundvisualarts.org. You go up to exhibit, click on that on the menu at the top, and you go down to current exhibits, and the 3 virtual exhibits are listed there. Many of these pieces are available for purchase if you want to check those out. And again, just many thanks to all. And just be safe out there. And keep sharing your artwork. Beautiful.